Well, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to our Sangha in America. Last week I was reading from some of the early Pali canon, this wonderful book, In the Buddha's Words, commentary and translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Would highly recommend this. And as I mentioned last week too, thank you. As I mentioned last week too, although the style in here is somewhat different to Zen, this is the foundation. Zen is built on this. So this is the core teaching. And even though we tend to use slightly different language in the way we speak, it comes from being informed by these early teachings. So I want to read a little, continuing from just the introduction, and then read a few sections from the suttas. And the Buddha uses the word in translation, worldlings, for ordinary people who haven't really examined their minds and haven't examined things that we take for granted. The most obvious things that we take for granted is that I exist here and you exist over there. We could say maybe that's the most fundamental, unexamined assumption that, of course, creates all sorts of distress for people. So the word that's used in this translation for that is the worldling. And sometimes it's like the common person or the everyday person, the unexamined person. And then the person who has examined themselves is called the noble disciple. Both the worldling and the noble disciple experience painful bodily feelings, but they respond to these feelings differently. The worldling reacts to them with aversion, and therefore, on top of the painful bodily feeling, also experiences a painful mental feeling, sorrow, resentment, or distress. The noble disciple, when afflicted with bodily pain, endures such feeling patiently, without sorrow, resentment, or distress. It is commonly assumed that physical and mental pain are inseparably linked, but the Buddha makes a clear demarcation between the two. He holds that while bodily existence is inevitably bound up with physical pain, such pain need not trigger the emotional reactions of misery, fear, resentment, and distress with which we habitually respond to it. Through mental training, we can develop the mindfulness and clear comprehension necessary to endure physical pain courageously, with patience and equanimity. Through insight, we can develop sufficient wisdom to overcome our dread of painful feelings and our need to seek relief in distracting binges of sensual self-indulgence. And of course, sensual self-indulgence is the whole range of things that people do to actively seek out sort of temporary pleasure or temporary relief from their mental anguish. Sometimes it's just a subtle mental anguish. It doesn't have to be loud. A lot of people just have a little uncomfortable, restless mental anguish, move from one thing to another to try and alleviate it. I was thinking about how here the reference is to bodily pain, And then I was thinking, well, how do we translate that to the types of pain that people often have who live in cities, where physical pain isn't always very dominant. There's like this physical discomfort, needing to get to the restroom, hungry, heartburn, little things like that that people have. The occasional bumping your knee or stubbing your toe, that sort of thing. But I was thinking, what are the sorts of pains that the inevitable sorts of pains that people experience in cities? And I just happened to hear somewhere that I think just over half of the world's population now live in cities, or maybe it's predicted to be living in cities. So it's sometimes the pain is shifting a little bit, the types of pain. I think a lot of the pain that we experience these days relates to our social standing, our social relationships. So then how could we just accept the inevitable part of that? Like not being invited somewhere. Maybe a family member doesn't invite us and we feel left out. How can we just, as a noble disciple, be able to just rest with the first part, I was not invited, rather than, and now I feel left out, and that feels terrible. How can we just be with the first bit? I got a bad grade. I didn't get the job. The shop is shut. Can we just, as noble disciples, that's part of our practice, to just be able to go with that first part and not add the mental anguish. Why does this always happen to me? That's why we practice sitting in Zazen, where we get to examine our minds, because then we get to see what our mental patterns are, because the thinking is going on all the time. We sit in Zazen, we get to see what our patterns of thinking are. Do I have a habit of feeling a bit like a victim? Or do I have a habit of feeling superior? Do I have a habit of worrying about what people think of me? We can kind of look closely and see what our mental habits are, and then in our daily life we can notice how that habit is this second mental suffering that we add. And this is what the Buddha's talking about, and this is what's being described in this introduction. Another aspect of human life that brings to the fore the differences between the worldling and the noble disciple is the changing vicissitudes of fortune. The Buddhist texts neatly reduce these to 4 pairs of opposites, known as the 8 worldly conditions. Sometimes we call them the 8 worldly winds. And we've talked about those here. Gain and loss, fame and disrepute, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. And it shows how the worldling and the noble disciple differ in their responses to these changes. While the worldling is elated by success in achieving gain, fame, praise and pleasure, and dejected when confronted with their undesired opposites, the noble disciple remains unperturbed. By applying the understanding of impermanence to both favourable and unfavourable conditions, the noble disciple can abide in equanimity, not attached to favourable conditions, not repelled by unfavourable ones. Such a disciple gives up likes and dislikes, sorrow and distress, and ultimately wins the highest blessing of all, complete freedom from suffering. So it says that the worldly one is elated by success and achieving gain, and so on. I have found this to be a very good practice. When something good happens, to just internally temper my response to it. To go like, oh yeah, all right, that's not bad. Like just take a mellow approach to it, rather than like, yes, like rather than approach like that. Because that has the effect of then when bad things happen, you can also then go like, oh yeah, okay, fair enough, I guess that makes sense. You know, you can have you can react like that to a negative event. And so then we're not adding that second mental anguish to ourselves. So it's good practice. I think a lot of people never think of that as a real practice, just to be a little bit relaxed and chilled out when something really good happens. And, you know, unexpectedly, or contrary to maybe how it would appear, it actually results in this sort of greater joy, because the joy stems from unconditioned reality, from the unconditioned, just the mere fact of our consciousness gives us joy. Just the fact that we're aware gives us joy, and it's not dependent on what we're being aware of. So a real joy comes from not getting too excited about good things, not getting too upset about bad things. And even trying out not labeling it too much as good and bad. Like you could say, this appears to be a good thing. I think that's a nice way to say it in our minds. Oh, this appears to be positive. This appears to be negative. But, you know, I think often we've had that experience, something that appears to be negative turns out to open up some other opportunity that then appears to be positive, and we think, well, actually, I'm kind of glad that didn't happen over there, because now this has happened over here. But then we just want to be a little bit careful. We're not too excited about what happened over here. Just move with things without too much strong judgment about them. Because worldlings misconceive things, they are agitated by change, especially when that change affects their own bodies and minds. The Buddha classifies the constituents of body and mind into 5 categories known as the 5 aggregates subject to clinging: form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. And we chant this in our Heart Sutra, slightly different translation. Form, sensation, mental reaction, and consciousness. Form, sensation, perception, mental reaction, and consciousness. We chant that in the Heart Sutra. These 5 aggregates are the building blocks that we typically use to construct our sense of personal identity. They are the things that we cling to as being mine, I, and myself. Whatever we identify with, whatever we take to be a self, or the possessions of a self, can all be classified among these 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are thus the ultimate grounds of identification and appropriation, the 2 basic activities by which we establish a sense of selfhood. Since we invest our notions of selfhood and personal identity with an intense emotional concern, when the objects to which we are fastened, the 5 aggregates, undergo change, we naturally experience anxiety and distress. In our perception, it is not merely impersonal phenomena that are undergoing change, but our identities, our cherished selves, and this is what we fear most of all. However, as the present text shows, a noble disciple has clearly seen with wisdom the delusive nature of all notions of permanent selfhood, and thus no longer identifies with the 5 aggregates. Therefore, the noble disciple can confront these changes without anxious concern, unperturbed in the face of their alteration, decay, and destruction. Yeah, I think it's quite challenging. Most of us have a kind of a world that we identify with, And so we can just check in periodically. And I've done this many times. How would I feel if I lost my job? Not that I'm working now, but when I was working. How would I feel if I wasn't working? How would I feel if I didn't have a Sangha? How would I feel if my family rejected me? I just tried to imagine I would find a way. I try to imagine how I would be okay. I'd find a way. Because who I am isn't dependent upon the other people's opinion of me. There's a lot of homelessness in the United States, and where I was living, there was thousands, literally, in the small city of only 65,000, we had over 3,000 unhoused people. And so they were, part of your daily life was interacting with them, talking with them, and I would try to think, I could be homeless, and how would that be? Trying to sort of cultivate a sense of okayness about it. There's actually a great story of a monk who, his vow was, I want to die in a gutter, alone, with nobody noticing. That was kind of his vow. And it's kind of funny because in theory that is what happened, but then we all heard the story and became famous. But still, I try to think, would it be all right for me to just kind of peter out somewhere? Nobody notice, nobody care. Could I lie down and die in a ditch like that and go, it's all right, it's fine, I'm just part of the whole universe. Neti as a particular thing is not important. It's just an idea. It's good for us to contemplate like that. We don't have to wish it upon ourselves, but we can contemplate it as like that could be a livable life. To lie in a gutter and die, that could be a livable life. Could be an all right way. Agitation and turmoil afflict human life not only at the personal and private level, but also in our social interactions. From the most ancient times, our world has always been one of violent confrontations and conflict. The names, places, and instruments of destruction may change, but the forces behind them, motivations, expressions of greed and hate remain fairly constant. The Nikayas testify that the Buddha was intensely aware of this dimension of the human condition. Although his teaching, with its stress on ethical self-discipline and mental self-cultivation, aims primarily at personal enlightenment and liberation, the Buddha also sought to offer people a refuge from the violence and injustice that rack human lives in such cruel ways. This is apparent in his emphasis on loving kindness and compassion, on harmlessness in action and gentleness in speech, and on the peaceful resolution of disputes. I kind of find it interesting when I read early texts talking about all the violence and conflict in the world, because it kind of feel as if it's worse now than then, but people in all different periods of time always say it's worse at the time that they're in. It's kind of interesting. And maybe it is worse now. I don't know. But I guess it just points to that there's always been a lot of difficulty. Maybe always. Maybe not always. Maybe before the written word, maybe there wasn't as much. We don't know. And actually, I'll just read, I'll never read this other bit that I just, and then come back to something. So this is actually from, because it kind of relates to this idea of difficulty in the world. This is from, to the beginning of what part this is from. This is from a section called The Happiness Visible in This Present Life. And I heard this because I've been listening to this book on tape, on Audible, and I was just really struck and pleased to hear the Buddha speaking in such a way about caring about ordinary people who often in society are mistreated. So here he's giving good advice about what to do about criminality. And I've got a kind of a soft spot in a way for people who are criminalised, even though I know people do terrible things and do need to be kept separate from society. I also have a bit of I don't know, being incarcerated is such a painful thing. So this story here is a wise king wanting to make sure that he ends his life with having left a good legacy, and that he hasn't just become wealthy. That's not the only thing he's done. So he wants to be a king that is remembered for having been decent, and so he speaks to his chaplain, his spiritual advisor. So this is a little section. When he asks his advisor, the chaplain says, "The chaplain replied, 'Your Majesty's country is beset by thieves. It is ravaged. Villages and towns are being destroyed. The countryside is infested with brigands. If Your Majesty were to tax this region, that would be the wrong thing to do. Suppose Your Majesty were to think, I will get rid of this plague of robbers by executions and imprisonment, or by confiscation, threats and banishment. The plague would not be properly ended. Those who survived would later harm Your Majesty's realm. However, with this plan you can completely eliminate the plague. To those in the kingdom who are engaged in cultivating crops and raising cattle, let Your Majesty distribute grain and fodder. To those in trade, give capital. To those in government service, assign proper living wages. When those people, being intent on their own occupations, will not harm the kingdom, Your Majesty's revenues will be great, the land will be tranquil and not beset by thieves, and the people, with joy in their hearts, playing with their children, will dwell in open houses.' And saying, 'So be it,' the king accepted the chaplain's advice. He gave grain and fodder to those engaged in cultivating crops and raising cattle, capital to those in trade, proper living wages to those in government service. Then those people, being intent on their own occupations, did not harm the kingdom. The king's revenues became great. The land was tranquil and not beset by thieves, and the people, with joy in their hearts, playing with their children, dwelled in open houses." I was just thinking how progressive that is of the Buddha to say the way to deal with crime is to eliminate poverty. You know, most of the crime that we punish are crimes of poverty. And in poverty there's often trauma, because with poverty there is family stress. When there's family stress, there's family trauma. So most of the petty crime and individual types of crime, even organised kind of gang type crime, which we don't have so much in Australia, but you see in the United States and in Central and South America. I'm sure in many other places too. It comes from poverty and the stress that poverty causes in the home and the lack of options for people. So here the Buddha was giving this advice that would be so good if all the governments of the world took this advice. Invest in the community, and then people, you will bring out the true nature, Buddha nature in people, and they will want to actually just care for each other, care for their community. It was really nice to hear that. Right, okay, so I thought I would just read another small section in relating to what we were just reading in the introduction about painful feelings. The tribulations of unreflective living. The dart of painful feeling. Monks, when the uninstructed worldling experiences a painful feeling, he sorrows, grieves, and laments. He weeps, beating his chest, and becomes distraught. He feels two feelings, a bodily one and a mental one. Suppose they were to strike a man with a dart, and then strike him immediately afterward with a second dart, so that the man would have a feeling caused by two darts. So too, when the uninstructed worldling experiences a painful feeling, he feels two feelings, a bodily one and a mental one. While experiencing that same painful feeling, he harbours aversion towards it. When he harbours aversion towards painful feeling, the underlying tendency to aversion towards painful feeling lies behind this. While experiencing painful feeling, he seeks delight in sensual pleasure. For what reason? Because the uninstructed worldling does not know of any escape from painful feeling other than sensual pleasure. When he seeks delight in sensual pleasure, the underlying tendency to lust for pleasure, pleasant feeling, lies behind this. He does not understand, as it really is, the origin and the passing away, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of these feelings. When he does not understand these things, the underlying tendency to ignorance in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling lies behind this. If he feels a pleasant feeling, he feels attached to it. If he feels a painful feeling, he feels it attached. If he feels neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he feels it attached. This, monks, is called an uninstructed worldling who is attached to birth, aging, and death, who is attached to sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair, who is attached to suffering, I say. It might sound strange that it says here being attached to suffering, but I think we can all kind of easily imagine how sometimes we have a negative thought and then we kind of get involved with that negative thought and we keep thinking that negative thought and we think about it again and we think about it again and then we get distracted by a phone call and come back and think about it again. We can get very attached to negative thoughts that are painful, like a thought that is really painful, like maybe a fear or an anger. We can keep coming back to it. I used to teach anger management classes, and I would sometimes joke with my students in my class. They were court mandated for anger management, and they would often say, "Well, I can't help it when I get angry. I can't help it." And I'd say, "Well, what happens when the phone rings?" They will go, "Well, I answer it." And I say, "And do you shout at the person?" And they go, "No." I say, "Okay. So you, in that moment, when you're shouting at your partner, and then the phone rings, you suddenly go, 'Hello?' 'Oh, no, wrong number. Okay, bye.' And anyway, and you go straight back, So we are capable, if we practice, probably need to practice, but even if just to reflect, instead of being uninstructed, if we try to start being instructed, we can catch our attachment to our negative thoughts. It was a really good little exercise I would do in the class. And they'd have to admit, "Yeah, well, I guess you're sort of right. But she's so annoying." Like, well, too bad. You might find her annoying, but still, throwing things at your partner is not okay. Monks, when the instructed noble disciple experiences a painful feeling, he does not sorrow, grieve, or lament. He does not weep, beating his breast and become distraught. He feels one feeling, a bodily one, not a mental one. Suppose they were to strike a man with a dart, but they did not strike him immediately afterwards with a second dart, so that the man would feel a feeling caused by one dart only. So too, when the instructed noble disciple experiences a painful feeling, he feels one feeling, a bodily one, and not a mental one. When experiencing that same painful feeling, he harbours no aversion toward it. Since he harbours no aversion towards painful feeling, the underlying tendency to aversion towards painful feeling does not lie behind this. While experiencing painful feeling, he does not seek delight in sensual pleasure. For what reason? because the instructed noble disciple knows of an escape from painful feeling other than sensual pleasure. Since he does not seek delight in sensual pleasure, the underlying tendency to lust for pleasant feeling does not lie behind this. He understands as it really is. He understands as it really is the origin and the passing away, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of these feelings. Since he understands these things, the underlying tendency to ignorance in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling does not lie behind this. If he feels a pleasant feeling, he feels it detached. If he feels a painful feeling, he feels it detached. If he feels neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he feels it detached. This monk is called a noble disciple who is detached from birth, aging, and death, who is detached from sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair, who is detached from suffering, I say. This, monks, is the distinction, the disparity, the difference between the instructed noble disciple and the uninstructed worldling. So just one little thought about the word detached. I kind of like using the word non-attached rather than detached. Not that I'm criticising using the word detached, but non-attached just feels slightly softer. Detached can sound a little like you simply haven't, like you're not engaging with reality, or like you're trying to be disconnected from it. And of course that's not what the Buddha's saying. He's just saying to not have your state of mind be determined by what's going on in the phenomenal world. To instead have a stable mind that's stable because it is aware of the present moment and cares about the present moment. Is aware and cares about the present moment is all that we really need. And then we just respond. We just respond moment by moment. All right, I might stop there and see if anyone in the Zendo or online Zendo wants to comment or ask a question. Brendan.
Yeah, thank you for the talk, Neti. Um, yeah, with the thing I sort of struggle with, sort of the early teachings from like the Pali Canon, is that they sound quite prescriptive, sort of, do follow these steps and then you'll be enlightened, sort of thing. But and I think the second last sutta or thing that you read about the solving poverty to prevent discourse in that society is sort of a good metaphor for I guess the path to enlightenment. So rather than just trying not to be attached to certain feelings, actually investigating the nature of identity to get to the root of suffering. But yeah.
Thanks, Brendan. I think that's a really good point about trying not to be attached. Because in a lot of ways, I think the reason the Buddha gave such detailed and, as we know, often repeated, lots of repetition in his instruction, I think, is to help us really contemplate for ourselves, like, could this be true, what he's saying? And then if we really contemplate it deeply, we don't even have to try then. You know, we don't have to try and not be attached. We actually just contemplate it until it starts to, you know, we see the truth in it, and then we just find ourselves actually not being so attached to things. It kind of just, it just starts to happen. I think that's what Suzuki Roshi talks about when he talks about the way to become natural is to practice and to contemplate and to study, which sounds like a strange way to become natural. But what I think he's saying is we have this natural sort of nature. Our true nature is actually really harmonious and connected and wise, but to rediscover, to find that natural quality in ourselves that isn't overly attached to temporary phenomena, we have to shed all of our delusive thoughts, and we can't shed them without contemplation and practice. So we just do that, and I often think of it as like thin sort of gossamer veils just get shed, and we don't even notice that they're falling away. Over the years, they fall away, and we see more clearly. Year after year, we see more clearly without even noticing, just from practicing. And it's our true nature. It's like I think of ourselves as like a beautiful Buddha statue, like our Buddha statue. We're like that, with all these little thin veils over the top of us, and over the years they just fall away. Not in an organised, like, set. It's not like fixed. Do this and a veil will fall away. Not like that. You just find yourself walking along, contemplating somewhere, and all of a sudden something sort of shifts in your mind. And you find yourself having some good idea about how to be nicer to someone. Not because you're trying to be. Or to be able to let go of something without trying to let go of it. You just find yourself actually letting go of wanting something to go a certain way. And being okay when it goes a different way. Yeah. Thanks, Brendan. Anybody else want to comment or ask something?
Hi, this is Kai. I couldn't figure out how to put the hand up on the reactions.
Hi, Kai.
I always get a little, I don't know if it's confused, but you know, in like childhood development, psychotherapy world, being non-attached is often problematic. And I'm trying to understand how that looks when we don't get attached to whatever, you know, attached to people, attached to our job, attached to our identity or whatever we tend to get attached to when we, you know, we like them, we want to keep them, and not in being non-attached so that it doesn't look like the people who somehow went through their childhood development with an attachment disorder. You know, they can seem very unattached, but there's no heart there.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yes, good. Yeah, good question, Kai. And this is where these are the exact moments where remembering that the two basic teachings, form and emptiness, always are functioning at the same time. So a child needs to have very strong and confident attachments. They need to know that someone is going to feed them. Like, they won't know it in a cerebral kind of a way, but in a felt way, they need to feel safe, that they're going to be cared for and loved. That's the form side, and all of us have a body. We all have a form side. So there's certain attachments that are very critical and important. So we don't lose that when we talk about this other side, which is, you know, as we mature as adults, to learn to not have a clinging attachment. Like, it's okay to be attached in the sense you have a preference for tea with milk and sugar, or a preference for coffee black or for green tea or whatever. It's fine to have those sorts of preferences. But of course, if the cup falls over or the pot breaks, it's really good to go, oh well, just cold water this morning. You know, that's the kind of non-attachment we want to experience, where we can shift and pivot as soon as conditions change in such a way that our preferences can't be met. And we also want our preferences to be wholesome, and that comes naturally with practice too. We just naturally start to lose interest in unwholesome things we have attachments to, and that just happens of its own accord, I think, through practice. Thanks, Kai, for bringing that up. All right. Well, let's finish with our closing chant.